The last thing we'll talk about in this particular screencast is a topic called ecological succession. So succession is a series of progressive changes in the composition of a community over time. In many cases, it involves a progression from less stable, less diverse communities to more stable communities with much higher species diversity. We oftentimes talk about two kinds of succession. Those are primary succession and secondary succession. So let's start off by talking about primary succession. This occurs when new land is formed, possibly by like the hardening of lava, new rock, or when bare rock is exposed maybe on a mountain through erosion. Once this barren rock is formed or exposed, weathering and erosion and other natural forces start to break down the rock and begin the process of making soil. Certain plants and lichens, which don't need much soil, colonize this rocky area. They're known as pioneer species. They're able to live there because they don't need much soil and they get their calories from sunlight. They do photosynthesis. Eventually, some of them die and their bodies start to form organic matter in the soil. And they also help to break down the rock by growing into it. This part of the process is very slow, takes a long time to make fertile, rich soil. But once soil formation progresses to a certain point, bigger plants start to move in. So new species move into the habitat. These cause changes in the environment, which lead to different species moving in. They cause changes in the environment, which cause different species to move in. And the newly arriving species oftentimes replace the ones that were there before, the predecessors. At some point, the community reaches a relatively stable state. Sometimes this is called the climax community. But it's important to note that change never stops and that ecosystems are constantly evolving or succeeding. Change may slow, but it never really ceases. So here's a diagram sort of showing us how primary succession happens. So we start off with a bare rock. We get things like lichens, which help to speed up the process of soil formation and contribute some organic matter. Then we get some small annual type plants, some year-long living plants. The soil gets deeper. We get grasses and some perennials starting to move in. Again, the soil continues to get deeper. All of those are called pioneer species. They move in before the soil's really ready. Then we get intermediate species, things like grasses, shrubs, some trees that can handle environments that are really sunny, things like pine trees. Again, they help to cause the soil to get deeper and deeper and deeper. And eventually, we get more shade-tolerant trees, things like hickory and oak, hardwoods. They eventually form a big canopy, push out a lot of the other plants that were already there, and they live long-term. They're kind of a K-selected species, so the environment becomes more stable. We call that the climax community. So this is primary succession. This takes a long, long time because mostly it takes a long time for the process of soil formation to occur. Secondary succession, on the other hand, happens in a previously occupied habitat. But that habitat is being recolonized after some kind of disturbance, a disturbance that kills much or pretty much all of the community. We're talking about things like maybe a fire or a flood or a clear cut where farmers or builders have come in and completely cleared off an area of land. So a classic example of this would be wildfires in like a oak or hickory forest. So they burn away most of the vegetation. They kill or at least cause to flee the animals. But the nutrients and the soil are still there. So sometimes the fire actually makes the soil more nutrient rich because it burns up and just puts more nutrients back into the soil. So that means that secondary succession is going to happen much faster than primary succession because the soil is already there. We don't have to form new soil. So before the fire, there was probably an oak and hickory forest that had a lot of species diversity and was pretty stable. But after the fire, the trees are gone. So the first plants to move back in are usually annuals, like grasses. They don't live very long. Within a few years, we start to get bigger grasses, followed by shrubs, followed by things like pine trees that don't handle shade too well. And then eventually we get the hardwoods that are coming back. And over a period of, say, 150 or so years, we'll get back a community, eventually a hardwood forest, that's very similar to the one that was there originally. So the moral of the story is here that secondary succession happens much faster than primary succession because it's happening in a place that already has soil, but that area was just disturbed by some kind of natural disaster like a flood or a fire or maybe a human-made disaster like a clear cut. So here we see secondary succession. So we start off with an oak, hickory, hardwood forest. We have a fire, burns away most everything. Then we get new pioneer species moving in, things like the annual plants, the grasses, followed by the intermediate species like the shrubs and the pines, until eventually our hardwood forest grows back and we're back to a more stable type climax community with an oak, hickory, hardwood forest. All right, that's it for our screencast on community ecology.